I'm Leila Benham. I was born to Nellie Pearl Benham and Emery Benham in 1945, just as the war was ending. And so I'm called leading edge boomer. As they say, the boomer generation, except they said I ended up being born a year too early, but that doesn't make good sense. So anyhow, I was born in a family of 7 boys. One was already born before me that was deceased at birth, stillbirth. So I actually had 8 brothers and no sisters.
Okay.
Next question.
So your family, where were you born?
I was born here in Cartersville, Georgia. I left after I graduated high school, went to Ohio, was there for about 40 years, leaving out a few months here and there, what have you. I think it added up to about 38 years. So I was in Ohio before I came back because my mom was ill here. And I got the word that they needed me since I was the only girl in the family and I knew health care. So here I am. I had been I was at a point in life where I was thinking about retiring, not doing too much of anything, but I had to find a location where I could get part-time work in health care, the field I went into. And I was thinking private duty. I had been a contract worker in Ohio for healthcare agencies, so I knew I could do that anywhere. Somebody's always sick or needing help. So I looked at Florida, I looked at Texas, I looked at California, and when I got the call from my brother, my younger brother was home with Mom, and he said he couldn't do it anymore. And since I was the girl in the family and knew health care, I should come home, so here I am.
Were you ever married?
Family is important to me because of the children more so than anything. I had one marriage, as my children call it, that once upon a time marriage, and I have 3 children, 2 girls and 1 boy, and the boy is the oldest. And they are my heart. And my grandchildren, I now have 6 grandchildren as of this year.
Okay. So, is that all you want to say about family?
At this point, it's just a matter of me deciding I was relocating to Georgia and not going back to Ohio where they were born and raised. And as they point out every once in a while, Ohio is their home, and Georgia seems to be mine, although they didn't understand when my mom passed away this year. As they would say to me sometime, well, Grandma's gone on and you still in Georgia, why? Even though I told them I was relocating to Georgia when I left in '01 and came here. That was 10 years ago. And they just thought I would just eventually just come on back to Ohio. But I like Georgia. I like the weather. And it's more agreeable to me than ice and snow, which was all my years in Ohio, my 30-plus years in Ohio. It just worn me out with the ice and snow. As I get older, I didn't want to deal with it. So here I am in Georgia.
Back to your hometown.
Back to my hometown.
All right. So now we want to go on to your career. When you were, what was your career? What was your profession?
Mostly I was in business. Of course, after college, you always end up with a lot of part-time jobs, and I worked my share of part-time job before I went into community service work with for pay with a community agency, and that led me into the world of corporate business. I ended up working for the appliance industry and been in the headquarters building for most of the almost 10 years that I spent there. And I enjoyed moving from office to office because I would bid on the jobs that was leading me upwards.
What were
But
your duties on the job?
I had different jobs, but most of my jobs were in accounting, bookkeeping, that type of thing, something to do with numbers. I was good at crunching the numbers, and I would bid on jobs that involved computers. I was a computer operator for a while there. When I went in, I started with early computers. We call the what we call a monitor today, the mini computers. I think the first word they used was microcomputers, but we had started out when it was called VDTs, video display terminals, and CRTs, cathode ray tubes. So it was very interesting starting out, and also one of the bigger computers that was about the size of, took up a lot of room. I learned how to program them because you take out your tray and you pull wires and insert wires, and I learned how to do that from the IBM representative because we used to have to call him out every day because those big machines something would always go wrong. And they had all these tip-top cards. We call them tip-top cards where I work, but they were the computer cards, punch cards. And they had errors that the machines would make, and the punch machines would make, that was the early computer terminals. So it was interesting back then. So I look today and I say, oh my goodness, this is great. Every couple of years they come up with something new.
Well, how did your education prepare you for those jobs?
Well, first I started out with business because when I started in the business community, females were mostly secretaries or executive secretaries, or they worked in a clerical capacity.
Did you go to a business school?
Yes, the business school prepared me to get into the office and got me in the door and everything. And then after I got in, my first job in corporate business got me into the computer field more so than anything else.
Okay, with the education, was the school, was it did you go to school as far as college or technical, or what prepared you, what in your education prepared you for the job that you had?
Well, I started with a business school and got a couple of degrees, all in associate business. They call them the associate of business degrees. And then I went on to the technical college and studied further in the business administration. And we had a campus that was the technical college on one corner and Ohio State University branch on the other, because we were 60 miles up the road from Columbus, Ohio, where the Ohio State main campus was. They had these branches. So I studied back and forth for years, and I'm yet a continuing student, they tell me, because a couple of years ago, since I've been in Georgia, I went to Strayer University for a few months, and eventually I expect that my goal is to get not a master's, because I don't think I need to go that far. I'm not going to attempt that, but my goal is to get a bachelor's in a field that would interest me, that would carry me on into my old age.
So is that something that you want to do as far as, since you say a continuing ed student, what would that continuing ed be in?
Right now, I'm thinking more of becoming a motivational speaker. I've done enough of motivational talk in the areas of, for youth, for older people, the Area Agency on Aging in Ohio. I worked for them for a while. And I did health care for them also on a contract basis.
Say that name again, I'm sorry.
The Area Agency on Aging. And I also work with the MRDD population in Ohio. I was certified, have a couple of certifications in there. One where I can even build my own customers if I want to, my patients as they call them. But I haven't used that certification yet for working with the MRDD population, which means mental retardation, developmental disabled. So I've used it in a lot of other fields, but because there's always some aspect of the health concerns and all the health fields. And I knew when I went into healthcare after business that there would always be someone ill and someone for me to take care of. And so I'm no longer actively working in the field per se in nursing homes, assisted living homes, and doing a lot of home health care, but I just go on call and part-time and do on call and part-time private duty work.
Private duty in the sense of?
Going into people's personal homes, taking care of someone in their family, and for a set amount of time, whenever they need me. It doesn't have to be permanent. It's just helping them out in a time of need.
So when you say you go into the homes and take care, what is the take care?
Well, it depends on the patients. Some patients need different things. I had a call here in Cartersville where the man's mother was just getting out the hospital, and he said he didn't know how long the job would last, but he needed someone on different shifts, and he was saying he might have to have 3 shifts because at different times of the day, of course, she needed different things. Now, if you're a morning health care person, you go in and you help them with their bath, clean up for the day, get dressed, get out of their gowns and sleepers, what they had for the night, and prepare them for their day. And if need be, you will give them a morning snack or breakfast, and then you're on your way home.
Okay. All right. Well, that's you want to tell us about some of your life experiences in that area, or just in general, something that you've done that stands out? Okay.
Now, after pretty much retiring from the business field and going into the healthcare field, I should say it wasn't afterwards. At the same time, I was working with different agencies in the community, United Way. We had one for sickle cell anemia that I worked with that group. And then I started working with the NAACP in the community, local NAACP, and I progressed to the National Organization for Women, going through different women groups to be of help to women in distress. We call it women's rights, because back then when I first started, we were called the feminists. As the one moderator on TV likes to say, feminazis. But what we did was we would go to the government and advocate for women's rights. We would advocate for the age rights, for the disabled rights, for all sorts of rights. They just weren't women's rights altogether, but it involved more women rights than anything else.
And why did you think that was important?
Well, it was important because the women were being more oppressed. There was men who could kill other men or other women, and they would go to court and declare they was temporarily insane, or they snapped. And a judge would say, well, we'll give you, a few years, or some even got probation, depending on if they felt like they were attacked when they killed this person. Anyway, back to the discussion about battered women. That was the syndrome that came out while we was advocating for women that had been beaten by their partners or spouses.
Under which organization did you handle the battered women?
Really, I started being more active in that area with the National Organization for Women Ohio chapter. I was on the state board for over 10 years. And I went to the first Women of Color conference that they held in Washington, D.C., where I met other women who was branching off into that area because it was being underserved. These women were not, they didn't have anybody to advocate for them. Half the time they go to a shelter, which were just being built more often, and they would take their children, and then they'd be told you have to go to court, file charges, go to court, and then while you're here, try to find you some way to live on your own income. And so they would have to job hunt, and they needed children advocates for that, so we started with the children advocates. I did get some people in Ohio on the board of local shelter who could help with bringing in children advocates for the parents, and so they could go out and job hunt and not have to take their children out into the community and find other people. And because some were the relatives of the batterer, and they didn't like the situation anyway, because there's always family members who side with the batterer.
How did you come to be interested in that?
It was a part of my life growing up. My father unfortunately got into alcoholism, and he and mom would have fights, and that upset the family quite often. And you couldn't sleep, and you had to go to school and pretend you had the normal family, but it was very dysfunctional. And then while I was married, I had a husband who thought that we were young at the time, and he thought that his friend was out in the street partying, and he should be out there partying. And he would come home intoxicated or high or whatever, and he wanted to fight. And I was in the church at the time, very active in the church. And it was upsetting to me for him to come home that way, even though for a while there he was in the church, because a lot of his relatives were at the church that I belonged to, because that's where I met him, at the church. So that didn't work out. That was a short-lived marriage. And that's what my children call it, that once upon a time marriage. And unfortunately for me, I haven't met anyone else that I felt like I should marry. Well, let me correct that. I was engaged twice, more likely 3 times. But anyway, 2 of them I knew going in that we had problems. And over the years that I knew them, I knew that it wouldn't make a lot of sense for me to go into a marriage situation knowing that it was going to end shortly, because it wasn't progressing in the positive direction. The relationship wasn't progressing in a positive direction.
So out of your childhood and out of your marriages and other relationships, you became interested in women that were having a hard time, or women that were mistreated?
That was one of the outcomes, yeah, and that was one of the things, but we had different categories in the women's field to advocate for, and one of my main ones was child support, and I advocated for that quite a bit, and not just, but otherwise I ended up being able to travel with these women, groups of women all over the state of Ohio, and to Washington, D.C., and to other states for conferences and what have you.
For conferences?
Yeah, so we could convene together, as we like to call it, getting around the kitchen table and talking about how to help other women who were oppressed.
So this was a national organization?
Well,
state?
We had different organizations. After I started out with NAACP, which had a branch called WIN. WIN in the NAACP mean Women in the NAACP. And Frances Hooks, one of our national presidents, over that, I guess you call it an auxiliary within the NAACP, and I worked with her on different issues, Miss Frances Hooks. And then we went on and we created a group in Mansfield, Ohio, where I live, named the Ohio Black Women Leadership Caucus. I worked with them for a while. They were trying to go national at the time when I got active with the National Organization of Women, which was called a feminist organization. They advocated for, they had different issues, at least 10 issues that you could work on within their group. And they were better known for what they would like to call wild women on TV. Some of the early feminists had to be really radical. They were really radical women for the time, because no one knew that there was women who would actually stand up for women, get on TV and
What year was this?
Starting out, this was about the mid-60s. And so for about 15 years I was active with the National Organization for Women. In fact, just before I came back home to Georgia in 01, which it was 10 years ago that I've been here. And then we went on to, there was a group called Ohio Women Inc. And they worked with, there was a coalition of groups of women in different, one was called the Ohio Coalition for Change, and different groups of women came, in different organizations came up under that banner of Ohio Women Inc. And they were active. We helped to set up a commission for women in Ohio, and that came out of the Ohio Women Inc. group. But then some of the well-known women in the National Organization for Women was Molly Yard, Patricia Ireland, and different ones. The main one now has a group called the Moral Majority, not the Moral Majority, anyhow, Eleanor Smil. I forget the name of her group exactly right now, but she was one of the early leaders in the National Organization for Women.
What successes came out of these organizations and movements?
For me, on a personal level, I got to know other women who had these problems, so I could refer to them. And when I was talking to...
Excuse me, when you say these problems.
The problem with women oppressions, child support, battered women, women who were raped and couldn't report it, couldn't get help because the judges would say they asked for it. Different things like that. We had all these issues. So, and also when it was very controversial that we avoided quite a bit in Ohio because the cameras automatically turned on when you talk about gay rights. But we had that group in there, that they were very loud and very noisy, and we would go for marches to take what we call Take Back the Nights for the battered women, but the cameras would, the reporters always asked about the other group, the gay right groups. Yeah, you know, it was gay pride they called it, but still we would sometime have to have state board meetings just to discuss how do we handle that group, because they were getting too much exposure, too much publicity, and the press was not listening to battered women syndrome. They were not listening to child support rights, things like that.
So after all you've done for the battered women, the rights of other women, do you see any progress now?
Yes, one of the things that we brought about in Ohio for battered women, we organized a group called the African American Women's Agenda Ohio, and the purpose of the group was to advocate for battered women especially. We had other issues under there that had to do with multicultural education, which was on getting the short end of the stick in Ohio. You didn't see textbooks with any people of color, children of color, anything in them at the time. And the governor was in the lame duck session, as they called it. It was his last year in office. And he told us, a group, they gathered a group around, including me, of about 100 women, and they said, we particularly call this group together because they have been somewhere, they have done some things, they've caused some changes. And we do not have time, this group is not coming together to have time to train anyone how to speak to the press, how to write a speech, how to organize a meeting. We Want Women has already done all that, and at the time I had done all that. So I was proud to be included, and the governor okayed the group. He said to answer the question of what do black women in Ohio want. He said, you can come back to me and we'll discuss it. And we was off and running. In each one of our cities, we organized groups to study what the women in our area needed. We held meetings, and we went to the press to advertise the fact that we needed women of color, as we called them, to help us to answer that question, what do women want, what do they need now? What is lacking in their life that the government might could help them with? And within 6 months, we had a working group that came back with answers. And we pulled it together into a pamphlet that we presented to the governor. And he did call us in for a meeting. And he did answer our questions, and he listened to us. And he said the main thing that he could do at that time was to declare, make a law. He made a law that all education would from then on be multicultural. The textbook, they should seek out textbooks, the boards of education should seek out textbooks that displayed colored, children of color within the pages. And that they would no longer have textbooks that just showed white people, white children interacting.
So some changes did come about.
So we did get those changes to come about. We went through the board of regents, and they were quite happy to hear that they could do that with the governor's permission. And then lastly, the most important thing for me, because I've been through the veteran situation, was they asked us for women that we thought that were wrongly in prison. And we got these women, at least 8, released from prison within that time before he left office. But he said that because we had stressed to him, we know many judges who have sentenced women to 10 to 20 years to life for killing their partner or their spouse, even though they had it on record that they had been battered for 10 or 20 years or whatever, and they snapped. So we said to the governor that have your staff to find these women that we had advocated for, the list of women that might be eligible to be released from prison under the battered women syndrome law. And he said he agreed he would do that, have his staff to make sure that he didn't release any women that it hadn't been reported to either the law enforcement in their area, the hospitals, or the family even knew that they were being beaten for 5 or 10 years. As long as it was on a record somewhere, he would study their record and see which ones he could get released. And he had 8 released by the time he left office.
All right.
And of that I'm most proud.